tunnels are underground, where none of the children will ever be found. They wandered away to join the show and lost their way in the world below. They joined the circus and left their town. Now they live here down with the clown.
Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into A Storm of Spoilers, a podcast covering the adaptation of Stephen King's It, that is, Welcome to Derry, on HBO. This podcast is split into two sections. In the first section, called The Calm, we will only cover a single piece of It media. This week, the 2017 movie It Chapter 1, and will not spoil anything about other It-related media or what people who read the book might know about future installments. In the Storm section, Neil and I will discuss how adaptation choices made in the movie might have influence over the upcoming series, and we'll take a look at the awesome, fun reveals in the Red Band trailer for It, Welcome to Derry. We're not spoiling, we're enriching. Why, hello again. I'm Dave Gonzalez, and I've read the book by Stephen King this time.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I have not read the book by Stephen King because fuck clowns. And welcome back to A Storm of Spoilers. Before we get started, I have some housekeeping for you. Here is our schedule, in case you were wondering. This week, of course, we're covering It, Chapter 1, the movie. Next week, we'll be back to cover It Part 2. Chapter 2, I believe it's called. Also the movie. And we'll be digging into that. And then the following week on HBO kicks off Welcome to Derry, the television series. We will be back in your feeds to cover episode 1. Those will be dropping Monday. This one's not dropping on a Monday, but, we're working our way to it. The early week schedule. You can also find us on YouTube if you would like to see what we look like as we speak words into microphones over at youtube.com/@Da7e, Da7e and Neil. And of course, if you'd like to get more from Dave and I, patreon.com/Dave and Neil, Da7e and Neil, with plenty of bonus content from our previous projects and all kinds of new podcasts every week, including our Adventure Pod, which is currently going through a bunch of Ed Gein adjacent films. We did Texas Chainsaw Massacre last week. That was actually a very fun discussion, even if you don't want to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This week we're doing Silence of the Lambs. It's gonna be great. And speaking of Hannibal Lecter, we are also doing a rewatch project of the series Hannibal. We are in the thick of season 2. Hopefully you will join us. That's for anybody at the $10 level or above of the Patreon. So that's where you can get more of us. Now, how do you get in touch with this podcast? In case you are just now joining us for our Derry era and you did not have any interest in our Alien Earth coverage or The Last of Us season 2, you can always send us a raven, stormofspoilers@gmail.com. That's the best place to get at us. We didn't get any emails this week, but I imagine as we get into it, we'll get some thoughts from our beloved listeners as we put down our roots inside the municipality of Derry. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. The rule, of course, leave us a 5-star rating. Say whatever you want. Here is a 5-star rating from the Apple Podcasts app from someone named Vin Sane. Nice. Who says, Dave and Neil pop with perspective that pulls you in. Stick a toe in, you'll dig it. And I promise, unlike Pennywise the Clown, we will not bite your toe off if you stick your toe in. We'll leave you intact and we will not make you float, which is very important. Speaking of things that make mostly children float, Dave, let's kick off the calm. Let's kick off our Derry clown era.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about the 2017 film It. It is now called It Chapter 1 because they were able to make a Chapter 2. But when it came out, it was first.
It was called It Chapter 1 at the end of It Chapter 1. I
That's
noticed
true.
On my rewatch, like the end of the movie says It Chapter 1.
that was also there in the first screenings, but when it was being marketed, it was just being marketed as it, and they split this 1100 page novel into two parts, much like the early 90s miniseries It, all of which now are available if you have that old HBO Max app currently owned by Warner Brothers. We'll see how that goes over the coming months. But if you want to catch up on any of those adaptations, those are all there. We're looking at the Muschietti versions, directed by Anthony Muschietti, because he
Andy.
is also going to Andy Muschietti. Because he's also going to be adapting and executive producing Welcome to Derry, and because Welcome to Derry is going to be based on some parts of the book that didn't show up in these first movies. So we thought these first movies would be a good place to start. I re-audiobooked it. I'd first read it, I believe, in either late high school or early college, but read it as a book. Taking the time to sit down and dig through those pages in like chunks. I have since redone It Read both on like a Kindle digitally, which is easier as you're going around to sort of flip through it on your phone, and then via audiobook this last time, which was a 48-hour audiobook, but I very much enjoyed that version of it and being able to digest the world a little bit faster, but also while like doing dishes and taking walks and all these various things that are slightly less creepy than being bound to sitting in a dark corner with a lamp reading it. So I think there's a lot of ways to engage with the book. I'm interested to see how this adaptation goes. And that is, I feel, something very similar that interested you, Neil, when you and I first started covering a little show called Game of Thrones. But for that show, I refused to engage with the text because I felt that gave us a good hook for covering it entertainment-wise. Now the perspective has been switched, but I also kind of feel like I need to convince you that this is something worthy of this amount of adaptation.
Sure.
That we're going to be spending a lot of time on it for the next couple of months, and I don't even know if you enjoy this type of adaptation.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, it is a good hook for one of us to have not read the books, but that's not why I have not read these books. Mostly, it's because I have a very deeply rooted aversion to clowns and clown things. This is something we've actually explored. If you're a subscriber to the Patreon pod, we did a Killer Clowns from Outer Space. What was that, last year? Where I tackled one of my great cinematic fears of all time, which was Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I'm not a big fan of clowns. I've honestly never been a huge Stephen King person. Not because I don't enjoy Stephen King's writing. There's definitely some Stephen King stuff that I love. Shawshank comes to mind. But I think there is, with Stephen King, just like so much to catch up on, right? Like, in order to be a Stephen King person at this point in my life, I would have to dedicate, I think, years to studying Stephen King to even catch up to where a lot of people that I know are with their Stephen King fandom. So it's like, I don't know, man, I'll catch the movie when it comes out. I don't know if I can get through reading all of the books. Also, Stephen King, bit of a weirdo these days. So I'm less inclined.
I mean, bit of a weirdo always. This is I
true.
went back and read some interviews with Stephen King while he was writing it. And he was basically writing It and I believe Christine and maybe Cujo
Christine's
at
another
this
one
time.
that I like.
And basically just like very into cocaine, raging alcoholic. This is this period of Stephen King. In the book on writing, he goes to say that he kind of doesn't remember the process of writing Cujo. And if that's true, some of that bleeds into It. I don't think all of it bleeds into It because it is a book that he put down and picked up a couple of different times, trying to find a way through it. But there are points in the book It where like that feels like a deeply substance influenced idea that's somehow communicated correctly. So it's a weird book. It's like Stephen King is like one of those writers that has a period, like I guess your Aaron Sorkins or your Bret Easton Ellis's, where you're like, you can't always agree with their perspective, but they did something really interesting influenced by drugs one time. And you're
Sure.
like, there's something here that they tapped into. I don't think necessarily, and I think Stephen King's earlier work and later work shows that he didn't necessarily need those crutches, but it is weird to see what is unlocked. So I do, like, in terms of Stephen King literature, I think enjoy The Stand and The Shining, I think, more in terms of what they're saying and as books. But I do appreciate it, I think, mostly because my brother and I were big into books growing up, and I would read like things like The Complete Sherlock Holmes, and he would grab like a Stephen King tome. So I remember him reading it at some point. It was just this big book that was like scary and adult. And then when you go back and you actually do read it, a lot of it is told from this interweaving child's perspective. This movie is the child side version of the story of it. And it is an interesting book to be read, I think, by children because, and I think this is something that makes it a difficult adaptation, is it feeds on fear, and the things that make it, the book, scary is Stephen King describing people being in fear, and that fear is triggered by something that it does or a form that it takes. Sometimes it isn't even described, and that's what makes it scarier. The limitation of the film is you gotta show something.
Mhm.
And I think the positive is you get to embrace the language of horror cinema and horror television shows to hopefully make those scares. But it does require a certain amount of adaptation, because I think if you film what's on the page, it's not going to be scary because the writing is about enveloping you in that fear. And if that works, then you're going to find the book scary, even if it's discussing a creature like the mummy, which visually might not be as scary for you, and therefore is very sparingly used in this movie. I think only once when they're fighting it in the climax. So I see why this is a difficult adaptation. I see why it's a tempting adaptation to make, because it is sort of like a horror Back to the Future. It's like, let's romanticize the past while sort of revisiting it, and also have like these fun special effects sequences. So I guess, what did you see this movie in theaters when it first came out in
did.
2017?
In fact, as a movie, I was looking back at my both my Letterboxd review and actually notes that I had written in 2017 when I saw it. And it's one of those things where it's like, I appreciate that it's a well made film, right? Like Andy Muschietti has a similar to like the way I think about James Wan, in the sense that he has a good handle on how to use all of the tools in the filmmaker's toolkit, right? The both visual effects, practical and digital, sound design, using lighting to create atmosphere, using like narrative rhythm and editing to create situations where he causes the audience to jump. So he's got a good handle on that. And I think that that's why one of the things that propelled this movie to such success and has spawned not only a sequel, but eventually this TV series, is that it's well executed, right? Like, I would consider this probably Andy Muschietti's best film. Mama's very good if you go back and watch, but Mama's is similar vein, where it's just relentlessly terrifying and full of jump scares. Don't watch The Flash is still my policy in his filmography, but yeah, I mean, this is a really solid movie, and it's very well executed. I don't enjoy it by any stretch of the imagination, because again, so much clown stuff. And I'm so immediately reminded of how ridiculous Bill Skarsgård's performance is. But there's an element of Pennywise, I think, that he's doing that is, tied to what Tim Curry was doing in the original miniseries. And then I do think that there is there are hints in his Pennywise performance of there being just this like this captive ancient evil that is like forced to come back over and over again that has made him a little loopy. I guess is my interpretation of Pennywise, which is like, yeah, he's scary and he feeds off of fear, but he's also kind of been trapped for who knows how long. And I'm sure we'll get into that, especially as we get into the series and like how long this entity has existed. But it also has kind of driven him mad in a silly way. And I think that there's an interesting mix there that I think makes Pennywise a really interesting antagonist beyond, because I do think that there is a potential for Pennywise to just be this one note, pure evil character.
Right.
And I think the fact that he's a little silly makes him kind of interesting. And I am kind of hopeful with the series, at least, that we'll get to continue to learn a little bit more of his backstory. You know, like every great horror monster, I'm sure that somewhere along the lines his mother fucked him up or something. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I will be interested to see, and there has been some stuff discussed in terms of the upcoming Welcome to Derry series about expanding on what's going to happen with Pennywise. So I'll make sure to include that once we grab Into the Storm, sort of like Pennywise origins that maybe we haven't quite discovered here in this movie. Although he does introduce himself as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, which does have like a background in the novel as well. Another weird thing that I think makes this a difficult adaptation and why I really appreciate what the Muschiettis did with it is the novel. If you were to do a straight adaptation of the novel, which nobody has really attempted yet, the stories are interwoven, and the miniseries and these two movies have decided to split the stories out. The miniseries, I think, because it was doing a 2-night event, it just figured like, what a great cliffhanger to have it. This one, I think, though, does benefit in reshaping the story at the script phase. And my understanding is that original decision happened under Cary Fukunaga, who was producing this project originally. And two of the breakthroughs that I think he made that the Muschiettis were able to build on, is my understanding, is his version of that project also focused mostly on the children. And Cary Fukunaga was sort of pulling more from the his own childhood and the childhood of his friends and peers and co-directors than from the book, and he would have recrafted some of the child narrative to be more focused around let's say our age peer group. So I think this eventual transposition of the childhood age to the late 80s also happened under the Fukunaga regime. But I think where the Muschiettis come in and there's sort of their understanding of the book is sort of the abbreviations that are made in this story that sort both to certain characters and to the plot line of the movie as it goes along to make this one be incredibly well paced. Very slight spoilers for next week. I think next week's movie gets a little too indulgent and they really don't know how to treat the adult storyline as a solo piece as much as they knew how to treat the child storyline here as a solo piece. But I do think there's a reason this is, you know, one of the top most successful horror movies monetarily at the box office of all time. I do think they were sort of able to crack that thing that made it a difficult adaptation. And they did it mostly by relying on Bill Skarsgård's performance as Pennywise. There's a lot of times in this movie where Pennywise shows up, where in the book another version of it shows up that isn't the straight clown. But this movie is like, oh, that clown's really creepy, we're gonna lean into him and it's gonna be the clown 50% of the time.
That's interesting because, you know, I guess having watched the movie, I would have assumed that the clown is more present, but it's interesting that in the books he takes different forms. But I think that's a good choice, because Bill Skarsgård again is the centerpiece of this movie. I also think that, like, as far as this movie's success goes, it really sort of hit right around that same time. That wasn't like season 1 of Stranger Things right around this time too. So like the wave of like kids on bikes bringing back the Goonies and Stand By Me vibes was sort of in full swing. And I think that specific bite of the nostalgia apple for our generation was hitting really hard. So I think that they kind of timed it well, and especially in the first act of this movie, they really lean into that a lot. The whole like idea of the Losers Club, and the fact that the kids on bikes are our protagonists, the kids in the Camaro are the evil ones, and everything that happens to our kids on bikes is pretty terrible, and pretty much everybody else in the town is an asshole except for these kids. And then as the movie goes along, worse and worse things happen, and you're reminded that this is like an R-rated movie. And I have seen in a lot of the research that I've done that Andy Muschietti, Barbara Muschietti, who his wife, right? Sister. I know they're related somehow.
It's a
sister, who is producer on this movie, have talked about the decision that New Line made to like stick with and stand by them to make an R-rated movie was very key in I think allowing them to sort of spread their wings. And also, like, you think back to 2017, this is a time when I think R-rated, big blockbuster R-rated movies were sort of having a moment as well.
Yeah,
it was not that far off from Deadpool as well. Like people being like, I'm gonna go to theaters with my adult friends and see myself a nice, fun R-rated movie about kids on bikes.
The kids on bikes was coming back in. Superhero movies was still peaking. We had serious adult things that were some of the silliest shit in cinemas in that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, I do really like the visual take the Muschiettis have on this world. I think it's a lot of times undersold because of some of the, I guess, cliches that now come along with, I guess in this movie, the first time you see Pennywise speed rush at you, shaking his head about, you're like, oh. And then by the time the movie's over and you've seen it for like 3 times and like 3 different creatures do like the speed rush at you, it's like a little bit desensitized.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I think the scares at some point do build to a little bit of a diminishing returns by having to rely on the clown being there. If Pennywise's cockeyed smile and drooling doesn't work for you the first time, strap in, because the movie's going to use that like 3 more times as it's like going through, because that's sort of like the scare language that it has. So even though I think it has sort of a limited scare language in terms of what it ultimately does, I think visually it is pretty great. The photography of the Barrens makes it look like I want to hang out there. I want to be swimming at the, swimming hole with the kids. Derry looks kind of nice. I don't like the people, but the layout looks nice. The kids look pretty much warm as they're biking along in their summer, and I don't feel like the sort of Texas Chainsaw sweat discomfort. I think it's a very visually interesting world. And then when it warps to become sort of another world, I think it's just very well shot and assembled, which again hits some crazy peaks and valleys in chapter 2, which I think is much more indulgent, but here is reined in to a point where I kind of feel like this is, and barring Welcome to Derry having like a standout episode that we're talking about, this is probably the one piece of it media I would recommend to somebody in your situation where I'm trying to get them to maybe peek into what's interesting about it, because I do think this is a pretty good adaptation of the story. It has a lot of the strengths. It lets a lot of the weaknesses and, greater questions either go unanswered or left for the second movie. So I guess what when it at the end of this film is confronted by the children and says fear and sinks into the hole, what do you think? What was your interpretation of that as somebody who has not had as much it back material as I have?
I mean, I do agree that this is probably the best entry point to the it mythology, I guess. And I will say that I do feel like I walk away with a pretty good idea of what this evil entity is all about, right? Like, he comes back every 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
He feeds for about a year. He feeds on fear, mostly the children's fear. He collects them in the sewers. And then he goes into a form of hibernation. So it's like when he goes down in the hole at the end, I feel like it's just they sort of defeat him, but only temporarily, right? Like it's not a clean victory for humanity here, because I feel like 27 years later, this dude's coming back, and that's kind of why they have to have their pact to come back and kill him again. So, but the reason why they're able to defeat him in that moment and not become his, last supper before he goes into his hibernation is they are able to shake off the fear, which is, speaks to me as someone who would like to overcome a fear of clowns in general. So yeah, so I feel like it's like he's not fully defeated. It's just like he's interrupted during this cycle of evil. And I don't know, I feel like that's just going to make him more mad the next time he comes back.
I imagine that is very possible. I think that is an incredibly accurate read on what could be taken away from this film. I'm especially impressed that you're like feeds on fear mostly on kids, because I do think this movie leans a little bit on like clown coming after kids when like it does nod towards the fact that it is sort of intrinsically part of the town.
Sure.
There's the part where Ben's getting carved up on by Henry Bowers, and that couple drives by and doesn't see anything, and then you see the red balloon.
Yeah.
And then there's the creepy librarian in the background, and Ben's in the library. So it hints that it is around, but I do think the movie leans really strongly into clowns versus kids. When it definitely does not have to be kids.
Well, I think there's this other layer to Derry that I'm curious to see if the show is going to explore, which is this idea of, these idyllic American towns, right? This to me feels very Twin Peaksy, where it's like idyllic American town where there's a bunch of terrible shit happening anyway, right? Like Beverly Marsh. Think about Beverly Marsh. Like, her life is pretty bad. She's being horribly abused by her father, and no one's doing anything about it. No one notices it. No one in the neighborhood is helping her. She already has a pretty terrifying life before the clown shows up. And, there's a lot of bullying. There's, the older kids are very violent toward the younger kids. So like, there's a lot of horrible shit that's happening in this town, even without the clown. And I think that he may not only feed off the fear of the children, but the apathy of the adults.
Yeah,
something like that.
I think the closest thing the movie gets towards exactly what you're talking about is by having Mike Hanlon's family business be this sort of like sheep butchery. And like the sort of grandpa's thing where it's like you're either one of us or you're one of them. You're either one of us or you're one of them, in terms of you're either there to be sort of like consumed and eaten or you're the one doing the killing. That idea
Yeah, and you
isn't
can't tell if
its
he means
idea.
the sheep or if he means the victims of the clown.
Exactly. I think that the book is really clear that that is an idea the book's trying to get across, that like it isn't necessarily the clown. It is sort of Derry, and like the clown is the thing it sends out to do like its bidding. But that being said, as I was saying before, the in the book it appears as something each individual child fears
Mm-hmm.
first, and then when that child tells the other children, the idea that it could appear as that is spread. So the more kids that know like it could look like a werewolf, it will suddenly appear like a werewolf to them. And so it's more of this idea of spreading fear. Hard to do, much easier just to do a clown
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the adaptation. But let's talk a little bit about our heroes, the losers, and sort of like the winners and how they came across to you and me in terms of the book versus film adaptations. Bill Denbrough, our lead character, played by Jaden Martell. I will say right here up at the beginning, some pretty good casting for the
Mm-hmm.
kids in this movie in
Yeah.
terms of overall movies that have had a kid ensemble cast. This is one of the better ones.
Yeah, I mean, not only is it good casting, but Andy Muschietti does a very difficult thing, which is gets good performances out of a bunch of kids. Like kid actors
Yes.
are not easy to work with. You know, sometimes that's the most difficult task here. It's not necessarily the nailing the visual effects. It's getting good performances out of kids.
So I think one of the biggest changes here, and it's a change that ultimately makes the film more propulsive, and then does ultimately lead to some conflict between the losers towards the end of the second act when they break up, is in the book. Bill Denbrough has no sort of like hopes that Georgie is still alive
Mhm.
in the sewer. Georgie is very much dead. He bled out without an arm. Georgie's dead, and his parents are sort of like dead inside and not paying attention to Bill. And so Bill's idea of sort of like going after it is much more an avenging Georgie and saving other families from being destroyed the way his family was sort of destroyed by Georgie's death. Here in the movie, they're like, Georgie could still be out there. He builds the hamster tube contraption to explain how the system, a sewer system of Derry works, and why they're down in the Barrens is because they're looking for Georgie or some evidence of Georgie. So Georgie is missing rather than dead. And every time somebody tries to bring up even what's her face, Betty, as being dead, they have to correct themselves around movie Bill, as saying missing because he thinks Georgie could still be alive.
Mhm.
Which I think not only is good in terms of giving Bill a reason to be in all these sewer locations without as much backstory as the novel, but also leading to that ending scene
Yeah.
where Pennywise takes the form of Georgie. It's much more traumatizing to see him shoot that thing in the head than it would be shoot an obvious ghost Georgie in the head at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's really all there for that narrative punch at the end to give Bill sort of the tension of thinking that maybe he's gonna fold to Pennywise at the end, and nope, shoots that little kid in the face.
Jackson Robert Scott, the actor who played Georgie, really got along with Bill Skarsgård. There's a ton of behind the scenes footage of like Georgie and Skarsgård in full makeup, like hanging out and smiling, and it's some crazy stuff. But good, he's really creepy in this movie, and I'm glad he had a good time making it.
Mhm.
We got Eddie, who in the book and in the movie is a hypochondriac, but this particular portrayal is much more talkative. Jack Dylan Grazer, the actor, is playing him a bit more motor mouthed than any other portrayal of Eddie has been. There, even in the first sort of like TV adaptation, Eddie was much more frail seeming,
Mhm.
much like in the idea that maybe the placebos and the idea that his mother needed to baby him had sort of manifested itself physically. She's like sort of underfed him or something to like keep him weak. This Eddie is like super strong. To the point where there's, I think, points in the group narrative where Jack Dylan Grazer is becoming the lead, and the movie has to sort of knock him back to keep him from taking over the movie. This is definitely, I think, my favorite Eddie of the portrayals on screen. What sort of came along with? I think he has some really strong stuff, not only because he has to face off with Pennywise while his arm is broken, and in the book, his arm is broken by the bullies, not necessarily by Pennywise.
Mhm.
Uh, but also because he becomes a symbol for what the losers ultimately stand for, and I think one of the best additions to the movie that is nowhere in the book, which is his loser cast that he
Mhm.
turns into a lover cast, was sort of without any prompting, but sort of like in this group idea of saving what is important to them. How did Eddie come across to you in this movie?
I mean, I think the cast is important. It's also really a good performance. I feel like the thing that stuck with me, especially on this rewatch, was his mother and how
Hmm.
awful she is. Like, I don't know if I clocked that quite as as profoundly the first time around, which is just how abusive that relationship actually is. Like with her, basically keeping him believing that he's sick in order to sort of like keep him close, keep him inside. It's really sad. I mean, I feel like you see it in pretty much all of the kids in their home life. I guess maybe not Ben, except for like, him getting bullied at school pretty
Right.
heavily. But like, each one of these kids has their own home-based trauma that they're working through that I think also manifests in what they see when Pennywise haunts them, right? So like he sees the leper because
Right.
he has, through the trauma inflicted by his mother's behavior, he's become this like intense germaphobe. And I think that you're right in the sense that he these kids sort of rotate the lead around, I feel like. And it's an interesting trick to sort of pull off, where it's like an ensemble cast of kids where there isn't just like one clear main character out of
Hmm.
the group. Like I guess Bill to a certain extent, because the movie starts with him, and George, the search for Georgie is sort of core to why they're down in the sewers in the first place. But I do feel like at a certain point, each kid sort of has their time to sort of take over the movie.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. The one person I think uh the Eddie performance and the Richie performances are the ones that ultimately don't get as much focus, because when they do, they might pull too much of the film
Mm-hmm.
towards them. I think this movie, rightfully so, because it knows where it's going, really wants us to sort of invest in Beverly, which I think is a great sort
Sure.
of shift in terms of the focus of the movie. That once Beverly enters the group, they sort of let her take the narrative focus for a little while, because everybody's attracted to Beverly, which is fine, very little kid and innocent, and I appreciate that, but it allows them to sort of keep the narrative shifted over to her, and leads to, I think, one of my other favorite adaptation choices of this film, which is for the final conflict, it takes Beverly motivating all the losers to get back together again. In the book, they don't have that sort of breakup fight like they do in the movie, where Finn Wolfhard's Richie basically wants out and challenges Bill, and then they all sort of like break apart. And Mike Hanlon makes that really puzzling connection that like always an outsider better to stay an outsider. And I'm like, okay, bud. But bringing them all back together to get Beverly, who gets kidnapped, I think is a much better idea than what happens in the book, which is just sort of like this building idea that like now is the time to go kill it. Otherwise, it's going to kill us. You just don't have the time in the movie to build for that, especially if they have this breakup. So I do like how this movie allows certain characters to take over. Finn Wolfhard as Richie Tozier,
Sure.
I think is one of the characters that attempts to take over the movie several times, which I think is actually good because Richie in the book is very different than the Finn Wolfhard Richie. The Finn Wolfhard Richie reads like just like a trash talking young kid of that era. You know, we grew up around there, not exactly there, but like, you know, give me, if it was 1993, almost exactly. I knew kids who talked like Richie Tozier. That makes sense. In the book, he's like trying to do voices, but he does voices bad, and most of them are some type of racial stereotype, be it, you know, straight up pickaninny voices to Irish cops, it's, you know, a whole bunch of stuff that's just not great. And then when he shows up in the, I think, TV adaptation, they make him a stand-up comic because in the book in the 80s, he's a radio host. But these idea of like sort of making light of all these sort of racial aspects of people. He does a slowpoke Rodriguez voice for like all the Mexicans and the "we don't need no stinking badges" jokes. They're all over the place. I love that's all that stripped out.
Sure.
And I'm very surprised.
He does a little bit of it at the beginning.
He does a little bit of it at the
meet
beginning.
him, but then they slowly like work out of it and just make him sort of annoying.
Yes, and I think I want to give Finn Wolfhard a lot of credit for that performance, because I do think once you strip a lot of that stuff of Richie out, it's hard to then make a character out of it. There's also a lot of stuff in the movie that, you know, Richie's outside for the first Neibolt house experience. In the book, he and Bill have their own experience with a werewolf that isn't in the movie at all. So the stakes are kind of lowered for Richie, but Finn Wolfhard is able to sort of fill in that gap, and I really appreciate it. But instead of the werewolf, when he finally does go in the Neibolt house, it turns out that Richie is the stand-in for you in this movie, and that they've given him a fear of clowns that he doesn't have in the book.
Absolutely.
So he's your point of view character.
Yeah, I mean, the moment where he goes into that room was the moment in my notes where I wrote in all caps, "Man, fuck clowns." Just all the way. Because that scene is a lot. And, you know, I agree. Finn Wolfhard, really good. This is one of those really good Finn Wolfhard performances under 6 foot tall. Because not long after this, he became 6 foot tall and has been over that ever since. So it is kind of wild seeing him as like a small person again, because I feel like, you know, by like Stranger Things season 2, he was like a 6 foot tall human being. Right. But no, he's really good. And I think, again, it's a credit to the casting of this movie that they assembled a really good group of kids who can actually act, and kids who give sort of dynamic and performances that, you know, Richie's the kind of character who could be over the top, could very quickly dovetail into fairly unrealistic territory as, you know, just being a little too much. But there is an earnestness to Richie, I think, that you believe that he's very much part of this friend group and that he very much belongs with these people, and that they, despite his annoyance that he brings with him, that they value him as a member of the Losers Club, you know?
Yeah. Then we have Ben, played by Jeremy Ray Taylor in this movie. Ben is mostly there in terms of like his book adaptation. I love the New Kids on the Block sort of runner. Obviously, that's not in the book because the part in the book for the childhood takes place in 1958. But here in 1989, I think that's a great connector. I think that connects him to Beverly much more naturally and in a much more childlike way than in the book, which is like he sort of gets obsessed by like looking at her ankle in a very innocent way, but is also several times narratively tied to things like, you know, being in the library and looking up at the, you know, steel spiral staircase and accidentally seeing like up a girl's dress. It's like it's cocaine, alcohol, Stephen King. So these 11-year-old kids are sexualizing everything, which is probably accurate to weird, creepy 12-year-olds. But this movie manages to take it out and makes it a very sweet New Kids on the Block connection, which I think works excellently. He still writes the poem, which I think works good. However, the book spends a lot of time with the kids hanging out in the barrens playing different games. And here we, you know, come across Ben finally joins the Losers running from Henry Bowers, and they're investigating the sewer for Betty and Georgie. They're not playing any sort of games in the barrens. In the book, the barrens is a place that they go basically to be away from the bullies and away from their parents and sort of hang out. And one of the things they do there is they dam up that like river that we see. And it turns out Ben's really good at building the dam, and he really likes the library, not just in terms of information, but on an architectural level, which leads to him being an architect later in life. Sort of by removing the dam, and by making Ben sort of the research guy instead of the architecture guy, you sort of take away his superpower, and then thereby Mike's superpower, which we'll talk about in terms of who's the research guy on the team. But it is, I think, mostly good. It's just towards the back end of the movie. For example, Ben's big thing is he's inside of his mind as a child. He's like in love with Beverly. He doesn't know how to express it because he's a little kid. So he's always doing his best to make sure Beverly isn't in trouble. And that leads him to like moments of bravery in sort of a classic chivalry sense. In the movie, after Beverly stabs Pennywise through the head with a iron spike when he's attacking Eddie, Pennywise then sort of on his way out swipes at Ben with his claw and sort of gets Ben in the shirt. And only then you realize through the shot that Ben has sort of stepped in front of Beverly. Whereas I believe in the book, that's all from Ben's perspective. So you know that he's like, he steps in front of Beverly, and that's why he's close enough to get slashed by it. So like very small changes sort of soften Ben a little bit. But much like the other kids, I think ultimately Jeremy Ray Taylor is kind of able to like have a sweet enough smile to get through it.
Yeah.
So sort of saved by performance once again.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really good performance, and he sort of becomes, especially as the movie gets going and like the back half, he becomes sort of a little exposition machine. But I don't know, somebody's got to be the exposition machine around here, right? Like he whips out that folder full of newspaper clippings, and he becomes the one who has to explain everything that's going on. But that's fun. I like the hopeless romantic kid. He's great.
Yeah, no, hopeless romantic kid is great to be there. Next, we have Wyatt Oleff, who plays Stan Uris, the Jewish boy of the group. That is the same from the books. However, I will say that his interactions are 100% pulled from Andy Muschietti's real life.
Oh,
so
wow.
I was on the set of Mama back in late 2012, early 2013, one of those two things. I was still working the film reporting beat back then. I got to go with like I think 5 other film journalists, and for whatever reason, I know why. We were on the set, I believe it was in Toronto, and like we were there with Guillermo del Toro, who was executive producing it. So because we like showed up with Guillermo and he's very nice to film press and very friendly with like all of us, he was like, I'm going to show you a movie. Oh yeah, come see the set of like Mama. And we're like, of course we're here to see Mama. Like, why do you think the studio flew us up here? But he treated it as just like, we're going to drop by. So because we dropped by sort of like with him, it was all very relaxed. The like on set, the studio PR person sort of like let us go everywhere and ask questions about everything. And so we were talking about the design of the creature from Mama and how it has sort of this like warped head. And Andy Muschietti and Barbara Muschietti told the story about this painting in their parents' house or their grandparents' house of this like stretched out woman that had like these warped features. And like that's what they sort of like based Mama on. And the sort of main change they made for Mama is Mama's hair is sort of floating like she's in water because that ghost died by drowning. Whereas here, the second Stan Uris walks into that room in the synagogue and sees that painting of the woman with the flute. I'm like, that is the painting that they described to me on the set of Mama. That is their fear, is this sort of like twisted face woman, is the fear of the siblings from a very young age. And so I was very glad to see it here. I am a little sad that it just deletes Stanley's sort of obsession with birds, because in the book, he is able to ward off it by his intense belief in birds. Because in the book, they want to say, like, in the movie version, which you pegged immediately at the beginning, them not having fear gives them the power. In the book, their belief is sort of a counterpower to the fear. So if you think something will hurt it, something will hurt it. And so in the book, what Stanley does is sort of lists off exotic birds that he knows, and that sort of knowledge sort of confuses and or quote unquote hurts it and gets sort of back off. It's very abstract and definitely would not work on film, so I realized why they had to do something else. But it also gets rid of one of its forms in the book, which is a giant bird, which, knock on wood, we could still maybe see in Welcome to Derry. But it's a fun form it won't take now because it has no reason to do birds. Instead, we get this flute woman. And so when I first saw the movie and I saw Flute Woman, I'm like, oh, cool, that's from the directors. But also I'm sad that that doesn't work. However, I do think Flute Woman's reappearance in the sewer when she captures Stanley and starts eating him face first is more terrifying than what happens in the book when he's able to ward it off through bird names. Like, her attached to Stanley's face is another great adaptation visual that isn't in the book but is terrifying here in the movie.
Yep. It's extremely gross. And
extremely gross.
And every time I see it, it's like I'm convinced that kid's not going to make it. And yet he does. Good for Stan. He makes it. Well,
and they give him that funny head wrap at the end because he has bite marks along both sides of his face. How terrifying. It looks like he might not be coming back. But stay tuned for next week. And then we have Beverly Marsh, we talked about a little bit. You talked about how her dad's horrible. And her dad is worse in the book. And she has a mom who sort of overlooks it in the book.
Okay.
But I do think the film adaptation is also leaning much harder on the sexual creepiness than the book does. It is definitely present in the book, but Are You Still My Little Girl is in the movie and is repeated several times. It is obviously creepy. And right before she kicks him in the balls, he's asking like, do the boys know you're my girl or something? Basically, insinuating a sexual dominance over her, which is much more direct than in the book, where it's just like every time he speaks to her, he beats the shit out of her a little.
Mhm.
So she just kind of doesn't interact with him or is constantly scared that she's going to be beaten horribly. Does one of those work better for you or not? Like, are you happier with what we got? Or would you rather it not necessarily be that sexually gross and instead be more physically intimidating?
I mean, I think this is the more unnerving version, right? It's the implication,
Right.
that of what he has been doing to her before we or like, what's happening off screen. I think, and even though it's an R-rated movie, I don't think we need to see the abuse that Beverly is getting in order to understand sort of what it is and how it's affecting her. And I also think that the performance of the dad is really good in making us feel like this is a very unsafe place at all times for Beverly. So
Yes.
yeah, I feel like the suggestion in the way that these scenes are executed is creepier than if it were to show just like physical violence, right? Because I feel like what his behavior toward her in the movie is suggesting is worse than, if he were to just like slap her around a little bit.
Yep. And then some of the things that are changed here, I feel like the book is very clear that these kids are like 11 or 12.
Mhm.
I feel like the movie is leaning upwards and allowing you to assume they're slightly older.
Yeah.
Because all
Almost
of
like
Bev's
freshmen in high school age.
Yeah, all of Bev's interactions with other girls in this movie, I'm like, I do not like. Maybe we're just living in Stephen King universe where the bullies are horrible, because the boy bullies also go from 0 to switchblade like incredibly fast
Mhm.
in this film. But I do feel like they're all slightly, Bev especially is slightly aged up. She does, she is a smoker in the 1950s in the book, but I feel like that's different than I don't think you'd have an 11 or 12-year-old smoking in the late 1980s, but you
Mhm.
would definitely have freshmen in high school like smoking in the bathroom in the late 1980s. So it feels like they're kind of sliding her up, which ultimately, is fine. As long as you don't have a line of dialogue being like, I'm 12, I'm willing to let my brain just assume they're children
Sure.
and date them where I'm at.
Yeah, well, and it also like, the way it sets up in Act 1 is like they're all sort of in the same school as the kid who has a car.
Right.
So they can't be that far off from high school age, because he's got to be what, like a sophomore, junior, in order to have a car and be able to drive, even in the 80s. So yeah, like these kids are like 8th or 9th grade in my mind, all of them. Like she may be a year older than the boys in the Losers Club, but they're still not that far off.
Right. And they still have like, separated classes, which I guess I also had in like middle school,
Sure.
but they're like, Soch, the kid from Soch.
Yeah, but like she
Um,
and Ben are in the same class, even though he looks like he's several years younger than she is.
Right.
But
I also think that a big difference here is that in the book, because Beverly isn't the one who's kidnapped, Beverly never enters the deadlights.
mhm.
So she doesn't start floating. She doesn't get visions of the future through the deadlights, which is something this movie adds, I think, to be like at the end, be like, hey, we know we have to do chapter 2, by the way.
Sure.
Thank you for paying to see this movie. we're gonna do it. But it does, I think, as we get down the line, make me, especially with some stuff that we're going to talk about in the storm about Welcome to Derry, make me wonder what it changes about what happens when you get hit with those deadlights.
Mm.
What happens to the floating kids? Because this movie has, I think, a very striking visual of sort of its kid pile with pile of children's belongings with floating dead bodies of children orbiting it. The book does not have that.
Mhm.
It does not make the float sort of mantra literal. But it does have some more metaphysical stuff when it comes to what the deadlights are, in terms of what they do to somebody and what metaphysically they might be, like if they are its real form. So it'll be interesting to see what this movie sets up, if you could see outside of time and the deadlights. Not to get too Twin Peaksy about it, Neil,
Mm.
but once in the deadlights, always in the deadlights. Where we
Mm.
might have to find out.
Or does
with
part of
Welcome to
you
Derry.
ever part of you stay in the deadlights once you've been there once? A
Yep.
piece of you?
Either the thing that the loser that I hope is most saved by Welcome to Derry, and we're going to still talk about this next week, is the character of Mike Hanlon. I don't dislike anything about the performance here in the movie. I think Chosen Jacobs does a good job given what he's given, but I do think they've completely changed the character. This is the least accurate character in terms of the adaptation, mostly because this adaptation, or both of these movie adaptations, really sort of skip over how intensely the book confronts race or the Black experience in 50s Maine.
Mhm.
And that is everywhere. That is the reason Henry Bowers hates Mike Hanlon, period.
Sure.
He hates all the other losers for reasons that are covered in the book. They've crossed him in various ways. They've embarrassed him in various ways. But he is raised by his racist father to hate the Hanlon family. Mike Hanlon's parents are very much alive in the book. Here in the movie, they have burned to death before the movie even starts. And the whole idea of this sort of like sheep processing, meat delivery is all made up for the movies. And Ben's sort of scrapbook in the book is Mike's family's scrapbook. So he even gets that part of his plot taken away from him. So I do like, in the movie at least, I like the performance. I like the final showdown between Mike and Henry Bowers, where Mike throws Henry down the well. I appreciate that. And I do think I will forgive this more if at the end of Welcome to Derry, they filled in the gaps of what I was missing from the race-based plot line.
Yeah.
They don't make Mike's life worse in this adaptation, which I think should be like, if anything, he's slightly better off.
And I do feel like, not having read the books and just having watched the movies, they hint at the Henry Bowers is like a little racist. But it kind of gets lost in the stew of the rest of his anger that just seems to be pouring out at all times. And I do think that from what I've seen from Welcome to Derry, that by moving back in time, that we may get a little bit of a confrontation with the racial politics of the town, which I think, they have the opportunity to, I would be curious to know why they soft pedaled it in this movie, but that also feels like a very 2017 thing to me, a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas like, we'll downplay this a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't think we were, it was 2017. I think if it had been like 2021, we would have been like, why would you adapt it without the race attitude? So it makes sense that we're getting to it now.
Sure.
As sort of like, America is ready once again.
It's very much a movie that was
past.
being written and made at the end of the Obama era.
Right. We're like, maybe Mike Hanlon could do something else.
Sure.
Maybe stay tuned to next week. They still sort of do Mike Hanlon dirty, but we'll talk about that more next week. Before I ask you more about just like the movie in general, I want to plant some flags here that Ben tells us through his murder wall that will maybe be important to Welcome to Derry coming up in terms of the cycles of it that have been canonized in this 2017 universe version. We have sometime around the 1740s, That's where Derry starts as a beaver camp. 91 people vanish. All they find is a bloody trail to the well and then a bunch of clothes at the well house.
Yep.
That is our earliest, I think,
Which is
mention.
Interesting, because I imagine that those 91 people were not all children. Most of them probably adults. So that's a interesting demographic mix for Pennywise at that point.
Yeah. In 1908, there's the Kirshner Ironworks explosion. 102 people killed, 88 kids, 14 adults. One of the kids' heads flies into a tree. We see Ben sort of haunted by this vision or this version of it in the library. That happened in 1908. In 1935, Ben mentions the Bradley gang shootout. We don't see that in the movie, but it is an event that happens in 35 and, of course, is on our 27-year cycle if we're counting. 1962, the Black Spot is burned down by a cult. This is something that I very, very likely think, not even spoiler, just based on when it's set, is going to appear in Welcome to Derry. I think we're going to see this event happen. I think this is the resurgence of it that we're going to be talking about. This one that either begins or ends in 1962. And then October 1988 is when it takes Georgie. And then June through September 1989 is when the events of this movie take place. If you follow that sort of arc, Neil, so as you mentioned, 91 people, probably not all children. There's no signs of an attack, but there's like a bloody trail to the well house and then a whole bunch of clothes. Then there's a explosion during an Easter egg hunt. The whole place just explodes. Then the townsfolk shoot this Bradley gang, so sort of a murder by a town. Then the Black Spot burning, which, slight spoilers from the book, is a club for Black service members that is burned down by white supremacists. That it kills Georgie. It appears as a clown to Georgie. So as this is sort of going along, there is a slight arc of, there's slight signs of it becoming easier for it.
Sure.
It is spending, it's not dragging and stripping clothes off of people anymore. It's not blowing up entire buildings. It is individually hunting people and sort of sweetening the meat of these children. So early, while it might be trying to survive maybe, or trying to get its stance, it allows the town of Derry to grow around it, much like Mike Hanlon's family's sheep. To sort of like be raised to the slaughter, to be raised in fear. And then when the fear sort of peaks, when they're right about to become adults and might be able to fight back, that's when it ideally likes to slaughter them. But if it is weakened, if it is panicked, it will take humans, and it will take humans with the help of the town. So the town can become evil and rise up and just cause a mass casualty event, because it needs to feed on all of that.
Sure.
All that bad juju to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, there almost seems to be a trend here in looking at it as a reaction to the town, or like a sort of like a punishment to the town, right? Like you could see in each one of these situations something that the town may have done to sort of bring this evil upon themselves, right? Like the original beaver colony, that's colonialization, right? They're stealing land from indigenous people. So yeah, that's pretty bad. Then I don't know exactly what happened with the ironworks, but I imagine industrial revolution, pollution, OSHA didn't exist back then, things being extremely unsafe. The town was sort of asking for it. The Bradley gang, the town murdered a gang of people. The thing with the Black Spot, that's straight up like white supremacist racism. The one in the 1980s is a little bit different, but I also think, again, a little Twin Peaksy. It's like idyllic town where a bunch of terrible things are happening to the children, and the parents are helicoptering, or the parents are actively engaging in abuse, as we see in multiple cases. So I'm curious to see if that trend holds, and like as we learn more about the history, whether this entity, it, is not just feeding off the fear of the town, but also that there's like this symbiotic relationship that it's sort of allowing the town to fester and then punishing the town every so often, every 27 years, I guess.
We'll have to find out, because this installment, this movie, and next week are mostly focused on our losers. They're the protagonists. That is our story. And
mostly focused, I guess, on two appearance cycles for it, right? So it's like this one and then the one that happens later, I guess.
I will say, and this will be part of the storm too, most of this movie adaptation, Georgie is focused on, and then they put a lot of focus on Betty Ripsom. We see I think it's Victor Chris, and we see another, I think, group of people being taken by it, but not a lot of people get names. So they do talk about Betty Ripscomb in the novel. The quote was, she'd been found on Outer Jackson Street just after Christmas of that year, frozen, her remains ripped wide open. Very different from being split in half in the house in Neibold Street, which is her fate in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very possible that a bunch of the murders mentioned in the movie that were not part of the adaptation, since we mostly focused on Georgie and Betty, could be replicated in the 50s, because in Welcome to Derry, because that's when it took place in the book anyway. You could do like a straight 1-to-1 adaptation of some of these kills, because now we're going back to the 60s rather than being in the 80s.
Sure.
Where maybe some of those kills seemed a little weirder.
They've left themselves some room here, which is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Gonna have to see what happens. Before we get out, we would watch a lot of horror movies. It's October. We are
so many horror movies.
We are fans of doing horror movies. We maybe overplanned spooky season. How do you just like this as a horror movie, Neil? Good time? Feel like rewatching it? No, I mean, just not for you.
It's effective. I'm not an enjoyer of jump scares personally, but it is very effective. And I will say this: it is a film that I would say has more digital effects than you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
And it has more digital effects that work better than you would expect, I think. Right? Like, I mean, there is a great deal of makeup effects and practical prosthetics that go into making Bill Skarsgård look like that as Pennywise. But there's also, when he opens up his mouth to reveal the deadlights inside of his throat, that is extremely creepy and I think very effective. And there's a lot of very seamlessly integrated digital pieces in this film that I think work really well. There's a couple things that look a little, like the mummy thing looks a little silly, but there are some really impressive, like the scene where Beverly almost gets sucked down the drain and then the blood comes,
by the wet hair.
Yeah, and then the blood comes like splashing out and basically redecorates the bathroom is really effective. So I will say again, it's a really well executed horror movie. It's not one that I enjoy revisiting because I watch movies with headphones on, and this one really pounds at you. But I can definitely respect the craft that went into it, and I understand why it works for so many people. you know, and why it found the success that it did, because, you know, especially the timing of when it was released, the way in which it's executed, again, the performances it gets out of the kids, and then the Bill Skarsgård just really going for it all the way. It's good. It's a good movie.
It's a good movie. Will It Chapter 2 be a good movie Chapter 2? I don't think so, but we're going to find out next week.
It has Jessica Chastain. How could it be bad?
It has Jessica Chastain. Also hung out with her and her three-legged dog on the set of Mama. Talked to her a lot about playing bass. I'm not good at interviewing Jessica Chastain. Every time I like get nothing, but we have a great time talking to each other. Maybe that's a talent Jessica Chastain has to just disarm all
people.
Interviews.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Just be like, oh yeah, what if I was interested in you? What if I, the movie star, was interested in you, and I get moon blinked by the deadlights? And that's how that happens. If you would like to join us for the Storm section, we're going to be talking about some adaptation choices that might show up in Welcome to Derry and the Red Band trailer. Let's go into the Storm.
What are you doing in the sewer?
A storm blew me away. Blew the whole circus away.
All right, Neil, we are back for the Storm section. I will say that we will be getting some background into Pennywise / Bob Gray, the dancing, the guy who portrayed Pennywise, the dancing clown.
Sure.
This is what Bill Skarsgård and the Muschiettis have said about Welcome to Derry, which is interesting because next week we're going to see at least a glimpse of a vision of Bob Gray. Jessica Chastain has a vision of the pre-Pennywise, unmakeup Bob Gray, played by unmakeup Bill Skarsgård. And then I think somebody talked about, while production was going on, sort of like the possession of Bob Gray. And there's been some discussion in the fandom, because this is not covered in the book, whether there was ever a guy dressed up like Pennywise the clown that it took over and it just became like its preferred form, or if it's going to manifest this because like it's going to need a name or it's going to need a form.
Sure.
You know, its formless days are over. And so it comes out sort of as Pennywise first.
Sure.
So,
well, yeah, I guess there are really like three options there, right? Did it take over someone? Did it manifest this identity out of thin air, or did it like copy this dude? Right? Like, could Bob Gray have been a real person who was Pennywise the clown, and it sort of photocopied him and used that form? So that'll be and I have noticed in the Welcome to Derry trailers, we get what appear to be slightly different versions of the clown, or at least maybe new clowns. I can't tell.
I mean, I think it's just, it takes the form of whatever's going to manufacture the fear.
That's true.
But what I'm seeing from some of this Red Band trailer stuff is maybe honestly, it, like Freddy Krueger before him, might develop a fucking sense of humor with these things. It's like, what if I killed while having fun? That might be what we're seeing here, which is a way to take a horror villain.
Well, and again,
it's not.
If you're like an ancient evil that has been forced to come back over and over again throughout the centuries, potentially, it's going to drive you a little crazy.
Yeah. Well, also the book talks about how that first time it fights the losers as children is the first time it feels fear at all. It has never felt fear before that point. It's not even sure if it's ever felt pain before that point.
Interesting.
So we are seeing like peak untouchable dark god force who's been feeding for centuries, and like, why wouldn't it do whatever the fuck it wants?
Yeah. But that is,
which I
in
think
the
is
book,
great.
that is the losers of the 1950s.
Yes.
But that has been moved up in this cinematic universe. Has been moved up to the 1980s. So I wonder if Welcome to Derry is going to have the group of kids also have that same effect on him, or not. Because
very possible.
You can't have him feel fear for the first time in the 1980s if he also felt fear in the 1950s.
That was going to be one of the questions I had for you in terms of what we're looking for Welcome to Derry is what can actually be accomplished here. We know, or next week everybody will know after It Chapter 2, we win this fight in the 20 somethings.
Sure.
Like it perishes, to all the adult losers club. So we know that it comes back to be part of It Chapter 1. How do we solve this prequel problem with Pennywise? Like what do our children need to accomplish this series, if anything?
I think Pennywise has to win. That would be my first instinct, is that as much as I feel bad for these kids, I think it's going to go badly for these kids, which is it's an interesting corner for them to have written themselves into, right? By saying that this television series is tied to this same universe, right? And by like doubling back in time and sort of readapting the same story to a certain extent. Like there are some advantages, as you pointed out in the column. Like they didn't do all the same gags. They didn't do all the same murders that he did in the book. So they still have those in their pocket that they can do here in the show. But the big problem is the conclusion, right?
Right.
The losers can't necessarily win this. They definitely can't win the same way, but they kind of can't win at all in this show. And it'll be interesting to see how that changes, or, because it's like when Pennywise comes back in the 1980s, he's not like, hesitant. He's not, he's not acting like a evil spirit who has been beaten 27 years prior. Right. Like,
yeah,
he's going about his business like normal. So it will be interesting to see if they find some way to thread the needle and end their, because is this supposed to be a 1 season limited series, or are they thinking multiple seasons?
As far as I know, this is it.
Okay.
But,
so if this is a limited series,
pun intended,
then, where they end this season is going to be very important. And I feel like just my initial instinct is that it kind of has to end on a downer. Like it's got to end in a place where Pennywise goes out triumphant to a certain extent, and the town is left, or maybe, yeah. See, I don't know, because like even if you get to the end of Welcome to Derry and like some of the kids survive, how is it that then the town gets to the 1980s and nobody is talking about Pennywise?
Well, nobody talks about Pennywise. That's definitely in the book. Like even the kids forget about Pennywise as soon as they leave Derry. Like that's part of the thing. And then they talk about at the end of the book also the memory sort of fading. So it's like it's hard to remember Pennywise. But I really love that you mentioned Twin Peaks in the column, because I do think that's the way out of it. If deadlights are timeless, all of the kids could lose this and we could see a conclusion that makes us feel like things concluded. But the conclusion for the kids is they're in the deadlights. A Twin Peaks Firewalk with Me ending, where it's like, we can't change that Laura Palmer has to die. What we can change is how you feel about Laura Palmer's experience of dying. That I think is a way possibly out for Welcome to Derry. But let's talk about some of the things that I noticed here in this Red Pan trailer. So we definitely have our new cast of losers, which I think is fun. It's a fun way to take it. We have the kids facing off again, gives a bunch of great adaptation points for stuff they left out. Maybe these kids are going to play and build a dam in the Barrens, I thought. But no, they have picked a worse place to hang out. At the beginning of the Red Band trailer, they are hanging out on top of the goddamn Derry fucking standpipe. These kids have no idea it's down there. But I also like this sort of parallel between Georgie and the boat, where now it is sort of one of our main kids in plaid throwing a airplane that loops around and gets sent into the sewer. But it looks like this is our new Barrens. In terms of the Barrens is the area where they all hang out. They have the clubhouse, which we haven't seen in It Chapter 1, but will play part in It Chapter 2. That's in the novel in the Barrens. Here it looks like they're going to at least have a tent and a hammock on the standpipe that sort of overlooks Derry. You pointed out as you were watching it, it looks like they've changed the position of where the standpipe is.
Mhm.
And I do think they're right, because I think we see Bill or Mike ride their bike by the standpipe house in Chapter 1, but it is not
It looks like
overlooking the town.
Yeah, it looks like it's further outside the town. This looks like it's right outside of Main Street, sort of thing.
Yeah, right at the end of the street. But that's going to give them easy access to it, because they never really say it in It Chapter 1, but I think in order for there to be daylight coming down over the pile and the floating children in the climax, that would have to be the standpipe. So I think it is directly under the standpipe if daylight's lighting it. So they decide to hang out right on top of the It nest. That's not great. We do see some what looks like military of the 50s, the Air Force, I'm going to guess. But we see who I'm going to say one of the black officers has Hamlin on his jacket. So I'm going to guess that's Mike's dad. And then we see them enter the house on Neibolt Street, which is weird that I don't think has a precedent in the book. My memory is it's never taken on the military. So this is an interesting development.
Sure.
And we
also
see
interesting that the house looks just as like dilapidated in the 1950s as it eventually does in the 1980s.
Yep.
Like it's just been that shitty the whole time, I guess.
They kept it. Who knows if the adults could even see the house really at this point?
I guess, yeah.
Anyway, the military goes into the well, much like the kids do in this movie. But while they're down there, they get attacked by an It version of Uncle Sam, which I think is going to be hilarious. We're going to get some not just Pennywise It kills in Welcome to Derry, which I appreciate. Why the military people are afraid of Uncle Sam, I don't know, but hopefully we do some experiencing with that.
Sure.
We also see some like the police, very specifically them making like a transfer out of Shawshank Prison in this trailer. So it is interesting, a perspective we didn't really get in any adaptation of it, is what the authorities would be thinking about it. We know in terms of the book that they are not really solving any of these child murder cases. So it'll be interesting to see if they try and fail, or if they have like some sort of weird hypnotism blindness. Maybe we're going to plunge into that. There's a couple shots of Derry being filled with sort of an supernatural fog or mist. And then a shot of Pennywise with his glowing deadlight eyes stalking a child who's crawling away from him through the mist. Maybe these two things are connected.
Sure.
There are some misty kills alluded to in the book, but I don't think that this is a specific one. Very specifically, I don't think it was like a little girl. I think it was the Johnson boy was dragged into the mist one time, but that is not happening here. So I'm not exactly sure what's happening. I am happy to see the movie theater scare that is also in the trailer, where it appears like somebody's in a red lit movie theater, and then we see a creepy hand come out. The movie theater is a place of a couple scares in the book, and it is not so much in the movie at all. I don't think.
We see the marquee in the movie,
but they never attend the movies.
Yeah, they never attend the movies, but it, some fun little Easter eggs, right? Like Batman, Nightmare on Elm Street 5 is playing. So that'll be fun. It's interesting that like it has the mist and the Shawshank Prison thing. I'm obviously there's Castle Rock exists to be the Stephen King mashup show, but I also kind of get those vibes from this Red Band trailer, which is like maybe we're gonna smash together some more Stephen King ideas into the.
Well, in trailer 2, one of the voiceover lines is closed captioned officially Dick Halloran.
Mm-hmm.
So The Shining's Dick Halloran's going to be there.
Yeah.
Also part of the military. He is in it, using his shine to help people escape the fire at the Black Rock. So that's what makes me almost positive that we're going to be doing the Black Rock this season of Welcome to Derry. So if we have Dick Halloran, we have that. Will somebody say The Shine or Shining? Who knows?
Yeah, I guess who owns the rights to that? That's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, is it a Warner?
I mean, would the Mist be the Mist from the Mists?
Right.
I guess is possible.
Yeah.
So this is a great place, actually, because we came upon it naturally. I was going to save it for next week, but we get a hint towards it here about how it is part of the Stephen King unified universe.
Yeah.
Working on the side of the children is a turtle, Moritan, who created our universe by vomiting it up when he was sick. It sees Moritan sort of as like a peer.
Uh-huh.
And they allude to a turtle several times in the movie. There's a turtle that swims by them when they're swimming in the quarry. I believe when Bill's all sad and goes to Georgie's room, he picks up like a Lego turtle.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of stuff like that. I don't know how much they're going to lean into the metaphysical part of it.
Sure.
Here.
So it's like in the Stephen King universe, the God entity is a turtle. The devil entity is a clown. This makes sense.
In this corner of the universe, as you go further up, those entities become the Crimson King, who's the big bad guy, and Gan, who becomes the like mostly indifferent god. But yes, in this version of cosmology, on this level, it's turtle versus clown. Or very specifically, the clown appears mostly like a spider. That's how our brain can sort of comprehend it. So
Sure.
Spider versus turtle would be a way to think about it. Back to the Red Band trailer.
All brought to you by cocaine.
All brought to you by cocaine and beer. We have an old man chasing a little kid through the forest. This kid looks like he's like some sort of page boy. My guess this is either around the Ironworks explosion, 1908, or if they really wanted to like page boy it, I guess we could be in the 1935-ish era of when it came about. But this is, my guess is more background of it, not necessarily of the kids in the 60s, which I think are going to be our future. We have a mass deadlighting where it looks like a whole bunch of kids getting deadlit at once. I have no idea what this is. There's a shot later in the trailer of a whole bunch of kids trying to get out of what looks like a locked gym. And I wonder if they get deadlit here. But also, if the deadlights are metaphysical, this could be something they're trapped in. We're seeing the other side of some sort of victimization or something. I don't know if this is the end or just a big mass event. There aren't that many mass events that we don't know about in terms of the novel. Usually it goes out of its little cycle with a bang or goes into its little cycle with a bang. So this could be a new somewhat event.
Okay.
Assuming there aren't new events, though, we have a shot of Pennywise in front of a burning something. It looks like a building. My thought is it could be the Black Spot, which is obviously a club that's burned down. But that one is burned down by KKK members, who I believe we see wearing plastic Halloween masks later on in the trailer. So this burning could also be sort of a flashback to the Ironworks, which exploded with all those kids, and the Easter egg hunt that we talked about in the movie, or something else. It is appearing as Pennywise, the clown, pretty normally. The Black Spot, I think people saw the clown sort of in the background. The clown wasn't super prominent in the Black Spot fire. And the Ironworks, I don't think anybody reported seeing a clown, except in It Chapter 1, the movie, Ben Hanscom's sort of like picture of it. There's a Pennywise cart, I believe, out in front of the ironworks during the Easter egg thing. So technically the clown was there. All I know for sure is that this Welcome to Derry adaptation is based on the Mike Hanlon journal, the interludes of the book, which is great because not only does that mean that it includes stories from Mike Hanlon's parents' family, a lot of the racism that the first movie sort of didn't deal with, but includes some sort of deeper history dives, and they're all through unreliable historian narrators. So to throw it back to what we did with Twin Peaks, we had all those Mark Frost books about like, here's some stuff that happened throughout time that was kind of creepy. It's very possible Welcome to Derry is capable of adapting some of those because the interludes do have just a list of creepy stuff that could be involved with it over the years.
Yeah. And I think I'm probably more into that than I am with whatever the clown is going to be doing present day. Like I'm fascinated by the history of this town and sort of what this evil means in relation to the town and what it's either what it's covering up or what it's responding to with this town than necessarily like its methods.
So next week's storm, just to let you guys know who are into the storm, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Welcome to Derry and what we know about it, but I'm also going to be pulling from some set photos and from those interludes in the book to try to guess onto like what types of murders or killings we're going to be seeing and what characters those could be tied to in the book. We do get some glimpses here in the Welcome to Derry trailer of I think at least 3 murders. I'm going to try to line those up with maybe some of the stories in the book and see if we could sort of guess at what we're looking at for a vague shape of the series. Next week's Storm will very much focus as the preview episode for season 1 of Welcome to Derry. And then the Calm, of course, will be covering it. Chapter 2. Better start watching it now. It is 2 hours and 50 minutes. And it still did not adapt all of the book. But Neil and I will be back talking to you next week to see what the adult losers are up to in It Chapter 2. Neil, anything else to say about It Chapter 1 before we head out?
I hate them clowns, man.
Fuck them clowns.
Fuck them clowns.